And welcome to Simply Divine, and I'm Alice Lee, and this program is very much about bringing you tips and guidance from experts in the field of mind, body and spirit. And today we have the amazing Zephyr Wildman here with us, and she's a inspirational yoga teacher. Tell us a little bit of how you got into yoga and your yogic path. How did you get here?
Funny enough, my mom taught at a local YWCA when I was growing up, and she did aerobics and they did yoga.
Oh.
And my mom would drag me to certain yoga event, and I sat there in the back of the room going, this is so boring. I just want to be a teenager. And I was a bit younger than that, but I was really interested in rock climbing, cycling, and doing all sorts of things.
Right.
And when I came here to London, I unfortunately had something going wrong with me, and it was into my feet, and my feet were starting to seize up and cramp, and that I had early onset osteoporosis where
Right.
the heel and ankle bone joined together, and all the connective tissue and the nerves were being damaged. And I went to a surgeon here in London who works with the Royal Ballet, and he said, I can take the joint apart, but I can't guarantee you won't be in pain.
Right.
So I then sat, and I just was defeated, kind of thinking, I'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I can't walk. And a little voice in my head said, go back to yoga. So I started doing yoga, and I cried pretty much every time I did it because it was so painful. But I would all of a sudden have 15 minutes without pain, a half hour, 2 hours, a day.
That's amazing.
3 days. And I started finding this reconnection of managing my physical pain, but also at the same time of being a girl from Boise, Idaho, which is, northwest part of America, to coming to London. I had at the same time not a physical meltdown, but also emotional and spiritual meltdown. Yoga was my solution of reintegrating myself, being embodied rather than chasing blindly, and bathing in this kind of suffering. So yoga saved me in that regards. And then once I started it and I saw that it had this healing potential, I started thriving, and I was like, I wanted more.
So do you believe that the physical manifestation of the misalignment had to do with your spiritual and emotional life at the time?
Yeah, I work with a lot of people who deal with either chronic pain or emotional or mental and spiritual pain. And I see that there is a link. We have 50 trillion single cell organisms in us. There's an intelligence in us. And everything that we've gone through in life, our bodies have gone through it. So this idea of this new generation of becoming more emotionally intelligent, but also starting to listen to themselves and honor their bodies and what they go through with a sense of awareness and acceptance, that they can move through difficulty a lot more effectively by using certain methodologies that are more embraced these days as yoga and other, techniques.
So, can you just tell us, a little bit more about yoga, the depths and different paths of yoga apart from the asanas?
As you know, my practices sometimes can be very physically challenging.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But
puffing.
woven with pranayama, woven with concentrated awareness, woven with sometimes mantra practice, woven with time to actually absorb and digest and assimilate, it becomes the kind of way of the middle path. The form of yoga should be to create balance and harmony and a greater state of well-being and an ability for you to sit in your own skin comfortably. So yoga classes you can kind of find that are fun and playful and do it, just like going out to eat at restaurants, and you kind of explore different things. But really the main staple is your daily, practice, and how you acquire the techniques and tools from all the different schools of yoga and all the different philosophies, and you take what you like and you leave the rest, and you study with a teacher who can actually monitor you, who can also give you feedback, who can guide you, and who can facilitate you in discovering.
Right. You do see quite a bit of ego in the room, don't you?
Yeah. And it is really interesting, but this is the point. If you have a teacher who understands how to use their words to be able to get people to wake up to that observation, and then what to do with that observation, it's key. Because we all have an ego. We're all afraid that we're all going to die. We're all craving to experience previous experience pleasures. We're all attached to kind of wanting more pleasure in our lives. Absolutely. But we also avoid wanting ever to experience pain. And ultimately, we keep ourselves in a level of ignorance of not wanting to see any of our part in it. So with the right school of practice or teachers who can wake you up to the methodology of being accountable for your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings or energy.
And allow you to have that space, the permission to let it all out.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I think it is to just, one, be responsible. And this is why yoga really is a personal practice. It's self-responsibility, self-accountability.
Yes.
And life becomes a mirror in which you integrate with this intimate relationship, and it becomes this kind of sacred. Every speed bump in the road, every obstacle becomes an opportunity for you to see yourself and how you have a relationship with it. And this comes from a very intimate yoga practice.
Yes.
You learn on your mat, and you practice on your mat to be able to practice in your real life.
Yeah. I find myself sometimes crying on a yoga mat, and it's nothing to do with physical pain, although I have a lot of physical pain. But it also sometimes brings out the emotions in you. How does that happen?
We have these kind of like I said, everything you go through in life, your body goes through it. And we hold these kind of psycho-emotional, physical knots within our bodies. And we have three main knots. They're called granthis. And we have Brahma Granthi, we have Vishnu Granthi, and we have Rudra Granthi. But these knots kind of knot up the psycho-emotional centers of the chakras. When you have heartache, your heart like grips around your heart. When you can't speak your truth, you feel it tightening here.
Yes, absolutely.
When you feel anxious, it's in your belly because you feel a little bit insecure and you're dealing with self-esteem stuff. If you feel sexually aroused, you feel fluidity and the sense of awareness here. If you feel scared, you clench your sphincter down below. So this idea of mapping the chakras and actually understanding that the knots within us, and when we do certain practices, we physically release and we take the breath, this sense of consciousness, life force into these areas, and we start to unravel, and all of a sudden sensation, feelings, unconscious imprinting arises in our consciousness. And I love the times when I have those moments in like Shavasana where I just can let go and cry, and people have it when they come to yoga. They're like, am I supposed to be crying?
Yes.
Like, what is this supposed to be happy? My eyes are leaking. And I say, I reassure them, it's fine. They said, that is the most powerful, most amazing experience. And then you don't see them for about 6 months because it's almost too much for them.
Too overwhelming, right.
Because it does open you up. It's a quick way of opening you up to be able to work on this stuff. But if you're not ready and you want to stay ignorant, you want to stay blinded because you're chasing the egotism, you're chasing the pleasure, you're avoiding pain, and you're really innately afraid. Of course, this is going to be too overwhelming.
You have a passion, in obviously helping people
Mm.
and elevate them from their suffering or bringing healing into their lives. And you seem to have a particular passion in helping addicts. Am I right to say
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Well, being grown up on a hippie commune and loads of alcohol and drugs I grew up with,
Yes.
and the patterns in both sides of my family. When I came to London, I had my physical kind of meltdown, and then my emotional meltdown was with my husband, who was in recovery. He was in NA and AA, which is a 12-step fellowship. He started mirroring back to me. He was like, Zeph, I think you're having some feelings. And I'm like, no, I'm not having any feelings. And I didn't understand what he was talking about. And he suggested that I attended Al-Anon meetings. And Al-Anon meetings are for friends and families of alcoholics, people's lives who've been affected by. And unfortunately, he relapsed, and he spent 2 years touring Relapsed. And we finally got him into a treatment center in South Africa, and he came back home 3 months later. The man I knew when I first met him, the man clean, sober, spiritually connected, ready to kind of do life again. And a week later, he was diagnosed with small cell lung cancer, which quickly metastasized in his liver, brain, and he passed away 9 months later. And it was funny because another little voice in my head was when he relapsed. I had a practice. I was very steeped in my yoga practice, my meditation, my Al-Anon 12-step practice, and I went, why me? And a little voice went, why not? And that why not is like, yeah, why not me? I'm the perfect one to deal with this. I'm the perfect one to try out like a little scientist. Does this actually work? And as I bravely faced my challenges, in which I watched a man who was 12 years clean and sober relapse on heroin, that's hard when you have two young kids and you're a yoga teacher, you don't drink, you don't do drugs. It was really hard to create strong boundaries, but I found doing that, the most compassionate people in life have very strong boundaries because they honor themselves and the other person as if they are sharing that same light, but saying, no, I'm not going to allow you to harm me and nor yourself. And I taught this, and I taught during this time, and I taught during the time when Adam was dying of cancer. I taught because I found my students a place where I was able to be seen. I was able to be heard, and I was able to immediately share these techniques that help me on a day by moment basis to keep seeking, to feel connected, to keep thriving. And after he passed away, the idea of being 33 and a widow.
And how old were your kids then?
6 and 4, two girls. And that we shared the whole process with them. And, it was heartbreaking. I had to walk around and I would teach, pressing my hands against my heart because it felt like my heart had broken and it felt like it was going to fall out. But I knew that I had to persevere. I was determined. And through my practices and keep showing up and being real, like some days I would have to just cry. And I couldn't keep it together. And my students would cry with me, privately or in classes. And I would make sure that I kept myself self-care up. So nourishing, yoga nidra, baths, going to meetings, being with people who are living, who are breathing, who are laughing. Laughter is such a cure for sadness and grief. But I found that, I realized that I didn't want to be defined by my story.
Yes.
Because again, having a husband being a recovering addict, there's a taboo. And there's a bit of shame, guilt, fear. What are people going to say? My egotism gets distorted, but it's what I went through. And so it's like, this is, how I react to it, how I respond to it really shows who I am. And if I'm going to define myself by being a widow or being, a victim of what had happened, I was just labeling myself
Absolutely.
and stopping myself from growing. So I had to acknowledge there was a part of me that wanted to sit on my pity pot and be the victim, and the self-pity of kind of oozing. But there was a huge part of me that roared like this goddess of kind of being, I don't want to be defined by this little part of me that wants to victimize myself. So I started this practice of mantra practice of that I am deserving and worthy of love, support, and generosity. I am love. God is with me.
Yes.
This is a blessing, like changing the narrative of the negative bias in the brain and proactively being in my life. I really put into practice everything that I teach, and I try to practice this even today when I don't have a using addict. I still go to meetings, I still am a part of the community, I still practice even though I don't have physical pain.
Right.
But I practice because I know this maintains my middle path. I do fall off, and I go into real crazy times when my life is unmanageable. I fall off when I want to turn into a duvet and get depressed. But I do know that I can skillfully come back to that middle path where I am vibrant and I am thriving, and I can, even when life creates speed bumps, I see the speed bumps and I giggle because it's an opportunity to, again, here I am again.
So when you talk about going back to your middle path, what is the tool? I mean, what is the actual practice that you do when you're confronted with a challenge that bring you back to this centered place where you want to be?
Well, in a way, we're very blessed because I think we've been raised in the Oprah generation of giving more emotional intelligence a platform, and this whole mindfulness kind of thing has come to surface. And I think mindfulness as a yogi, it doesn't sit with me as well because it means that you're full of mind.
Right.
And in my mind, if I sit there for too long, I go crazy.
Absolutely.
However, awarefulness or awakefulness, this idea of we are a sum total of all of our choices. And if we choose to be unconscious throughout the whole day, at the end of the day when we put our head down on our pillow, we're overwhelmed with unmanageable thoughts and feelings, and we all of a sudden, we're kind of like, oh, what's going on with, well, I don't know who I am. However, if we choose more mindful points or awareful or awakeful points throughout the day of stopping, being in our own body, taking accountability and inventory of kind of going, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? How am I? What do I need right now? Then all of a sudden, when you put your head down on the pillow, there's this sense of success. Yeah.
It's about, being conscious enough, being present, and so that you know you're alive.
Yeah. And even honoring what sadness feels like. And this weird thing is that we're not taught emotional intelligence or how to deal with emotional fluctuation. And in this immature way, it feels like if you're in the dark side, it's going to be forever and it's permanent. And it's like to teach our children and to inform others that it's transient. Just like a really intense stretch, it's transient. It does change. It's impermanent. But to sit with it and understand what is at the root of your suffering. And learn from it. But how do you learn from it? You sit with it. You become going, okay, where did this come from? What was the few steps right before? Why did this occur? And so there's the yogic path is the study of self-knowledge and self-understanding. The tantric path is the study of power or life force or prana. So the idea of practicing is cultivating a lot of heat, a lot of power, a lot of life force, and also this idea of self-study, of knowing thyself, and knowing, becoming self-aware. This idea that yoga and this awarefulness movement or mindfulness is to become more self-aware, and in hopes you become more skillful at self-knowing. And that sense of understanding the self.
And be compassionate.
Compassionate,
Myself, yeah.
And kind and loving. But that leads you down to that road of self-realization, which is the goal of yoga, is to realize the self beyond the self.